guys are celebrating 75 years for the family in the sport. You, Mr. Petty, or Richard, have seen a lot. What does it mean for you just to have been in this sport for this long?
Yeah, very few of us still around, I guess. I went to the very first race Cup race that NASCAR had in 1949 and been going ever since. And, this year we're celebrating the 75th year of the Petty organization, Petty people. It started with my dad, come to me, went to Kyle, Adam. I got a grandson that's running again. And so it's not just a Richard Petty deal or a Kyle Petty. It's Petty family. So the Petty family's been here for 75 years and looking forward to another 75.
You mentioned that first race. Do you remember that first race, what that experience was like as a kid?
Not a whole lot. I know we drove the car to Charlotte. My dad turned the thing over, and we had to thumb a ride with my uncle to get back home. I do remember that part of it, but then that was the beginning of Lee Petty and Petty Enterprises. So, he decided, hey man, they paying $1,500 to win a race. I can buy a car for $1,000. So we went in the racing business.
When your family got into this, did people think you all were crazy? I mean, nobody knew what NASCAR was then. I mean,
they wasn't no. Yeah, we were outlaws. Okay, people looked down on the racing fraternity. So like probably they look back on bootleggers or something. It's a different crowd of people. But it really took years for even the people in our community to say, hey, these guys are legitimate. Racing is a legitimate deal. So, from there it's just grown ever since.
So Carl, what was it like growing up around your father, your grandfather, the Petty name, the family coming into racing when you did? What was that like?
Normal. That's all you can say. And I tell people all the time, we grew up in rural North Carolina where everybody had a farm. We just happened to raise race cars on our farm. And there were lots of, and he knows, there were lots of second, third, fourth generation farms all around where we lived. So it was nothing for Granddaddy Petty to start racing, and then second generation, then third generation, then Adam comes along as a fourth generation. It was just, it's common in our community. So it's not a big deal. And, I came along in 60, was born in 1960, and have just been going to races always. So it's just been your normal life. Where most kids grow up and their dad goes to work at 9 and comes home at 5, and they get that 1 week of vacation every year and all this stuff. We didn't have that, but what we had was normal for us. For my sister Sharon and my sister Lisa and my sister Rebecca, we just went to racetracks, so it was pretty standard.
So for you, was there ever any thought of doing anything else?
Yes, probably yes and no. My mom wanted me to be a pharmacist. So if that tells you anything, she thought I would be a great pharmacist. But and I played football, basketball, baseball, just like him, because it's a small community. Everybody did everything. I played music, and I've done so many things. But at the same time, your touchstone and the cornerstone of what your life was that race shop and those race cars. And that's what you always came back to. No matter where you ventured out to, you always came back to there. So I don't think there was ever a question. And I always told people, by the time I got to be 18, I was so lazy and I already knew a little bit about racing. I just figured I'd go down that road. Instead of going to work for a living, I'd just ride around in circles for a living. So, but I don't think there was ever a question about, because you just grew up with it, where Grandma and Granddaddy's house was next door. And Uncle Marsh's house was across the street. And Uncle Marsh drove for a while, my dad drove, my granddad drove, my grandmother ran the business and looked after the books and made hotel reservations and everything, and it was just that family business, and so there was no question that you weren't going to go into it at some time.
So Richard, this is hard. I don't care what generation of race car driver you are. This sport is hard. Was your family still your family with your grandson? how are you able to find success in this sport? Because it's not for everyone, and
Well,
sustained success.
It's definitely not for everybody. But I did nothing by myself. There was always my dad or my brother, Dale Inman, our crew chief. I had the family around you. But then you had all these people that worked for us over the years. They're the ones that made it work. All I done was drive the car. And so, when you look at Richard Petty, he done this, he done that, but he never done anything by himself. He always had a real good backup, because if you've not got a good foundation, it doesn't make any difference how good a driver I was if the car didn't finish the race. So from that standpoint, it was not a one-man show. It took a lot of people to make it work. I just happened to be the one that they put out front and said, okay, he's doing it.
Are you ever surprised that as long as you've been retired, how many people, I mean, I see you walk through the garage and you're like the Pied Piper. I mean, you've got a string of people behind you.
Well, yeah, but I've been here longer than anybody else. Okay.
Right, but I mean,
other
retired people in other sports don't draw the crowd that you draw.
I'm kind of like Santa Claus. Okay. No. Again, we've been here so long. These guys that's now driving race cars and stuff wasn't even thought about being born, and most of the crews, they never grew up in racing. Most of these people that's around now didn't grow up in racing, or a different kind of racing. And but if you ever was involved in racing in any way, shape, or form, then you've heard tell of Petty Enterprises. You've heard tell of our drivers, our wins, and it's my dad, Kyle, Adam, and so NASCAR was the big deal, but we was right under NASCAR because we've been here so long.
Let me answer a little bit of that.
Because I was going to ask you this.
Yeah, no. Let me, and from his perspective, it is. So he was here from the beginning, and he said, and that's a very simplistic answer to say I've just been here a long time. The fact is that as the sport grew through the 50s and the 60s, and he was there in the 60s and 70s and stuff, he won so many races and won so many big races, 7 times at Daytona, 7 championships, 200 wins. And you look at all that, and there are guys in other sports, well, whether it be, Tiger Woods, whether it be Michael Jordan, whether it be Tom Brady, that just transcend their sports. The sport made them who they are, but they're separated from the sport in so many ways. So here you got a guy that's 86 years old now as we sit here and do this, but there's as many 6 and 7 year olds that know him as Mr. the King from the Cars movies. You know what I mean? So how many other athletes do you know that can have fans that are at 86 years old, who are 6 years old, or who are 86 years old? And that's what makes that crowd follow him, is because it's not just, you don't just think, oh, there's Richard Petty, he drove a race car. Oh, there's Richard Petty, he won all these races, he did all this stuff. And oh yeah, my grandson watches him in the movies, and watches him as Mr. the King. So I think there's athletes in certain sports that do transcend. Ali, I mean, just great athletes. But you take them out of that context and people recognize him still, and that's the way he is. Not every athlete is that way. Not every race car driver is that way. Very, very few. There may be 1 or 2, him and Mario. That's kind of it. I mean, when I really start in AJ, you can throw AJ, and then you get to Earnhardt and some of those guys. But there's not many that you can take out of the context of what they did, and you realize who they are.
And it feels like, too, just kind of as a follow-up, I mean, so many of his records are unbreakable.
Yeah.
Because they're just numbers you couldn't get to no matter how long you race now.
Yeah.
I mean, does that also add to...
That adds to the mystique.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure it adds to the mystique. When you look at any record, and it's that crazy saying, records are made to be broken. Not all records are made to be broken, because some records were made at times in a sport or in an industry even. Where you're never gonna make that many cars again. You're never gonna sell that many toys again. Whatever that may be. We're in a time when you look at the recording industry, where it used to be album sales, now it's downloads and streams, and so you're not going to have that album sale record anymore. You know, that record's going to stand forever as far as that. So some of his records that he has made, they're never going to be touched because of the amount of races we run, because of where we're at in the sport and the way the sport is now.
What's either one and or both of you can answer this. What's the one thing that you want people, 100 years from now, when none of us are here anymore, to remember about the Petty name? What do you want people to think when they think about Petty?
I've answered this question a lot. It's just remembered. If you remembered, everybody that knows Richard Petty has got a different concept. Okay, some like him, some don't like him. He's done some good things, he's done some bad things. So the big deal is just be remembered, whether you remember it as a good guy or a bad guy. But I think, I was talking about legacies and all that. When we lost Adam, we started Victory Junction Camp for chronically and seriously ill kids. And I'm hoping that, racing liable not to ever be here for a long time. Petty's is not going to be here. But Victory Junction can be here to take care of those kids for years and years and years and years to come. So if nothing else, if we've left a legacy, Kyle, myself, Adam, the Petty clan has left a legacy, then it's Victory Junction, then we couldn't ask for any more than that.
Yeah, and listen, I think, and you can see, I think he's got it on him, I've got it on me, we got it on the hat, and you started this interview that way. It says 75 years of racing, you know what I mean? But I think when you look back, it's also 75 years of family, and that you have to look at it that way. And I think that's what people will remember as much as anything, is for a large chunk of this sport, there was one family who was there from the beginning, who continued for maybe too long, but they were there for a long time.
Is there a defining moment for this family in racing that really, I don't know, is something that solidified where you felt like you were in the sport? Was it the first 7th championship? Was it 200th win? Or maybe something early on that made you?
I think when I look back, it's just a combination of different things you've done in different periods of your life, different parts of racing. Whether you won Daytona 64, you won in 89, 79, you won your 200th race at Daytona. Daytona's been a big deal in the Petty operation. Pete Hamilton won a race here for us. My dad won the very first 500, so we got a lot of history here. But the big deal, that was a big thing at the time. But we've been fortunate enough that something happened, and that's the biggest thing that's happened. But we got lucky and done something the next year, 5 years down the road, and everything in history sort of slides away, and it's more of what you done today and what you're going to do tomorrow.
I don't think you can look at. You have to look at the totality of the work, and the complete body of work. And when you look at it, the only word that comes to mind is relevance. You were relevant in the first race, and you're relevant in the race they run tomorrow. And I think that's the way you want to be. That is the biggest thing. So there's not one big moment. You've just always been relevant.
The nickname the King. You were already the king by the time I came around. How did this happen? How do you feel about it? Do you like it?
Well, I've been called a lot of things. Okay. King's probably the easiest deal. But the big deal was that if my name had been Joe, it wouldn't be King Joe. It just happened to be Richard, and some reporters got together and said, we're going to name a few deals. David Pearson was Silver Fox. Darrell was Charles.
Yeah.
They just hung some nicknames on it.
It came from the press.
It came from the press.
Yeah, it came from them.
The big deal was, I guess it came about in the mid-'60s, 66, 67, where we won all the races and stuff. And they got together and just decided the name deal. And Richard was King, just happened to go with Richard. And it rhymed, and like I said, rather be called that and a lot of other things.